Okay, what's up everyone? It is 12:05, so we are going to get started for the day. If you are not a member of my CA 200 class, welcome. This is a lecture stream. We're talking about gaming culture today for an Introduction to Digital Communication course. I'm Green Eye Trombonist. That's how I usually introduce myself on my Twitch stream. And for my students, you'll notice we've got a few things different than our usual for class today. I've got announcements in the upper section over that way. Right above me, we actually have a game that we're going to be playing. We're playing Pokemon Brilliant Diamond. And we've got the lecture over that way. Always having to double check things since I'm mirrored. So that's what we'll have today. Lecture obviously being the biggest thing. At home, this is on a triple monitor setup. Since we talk about technological affordances a lot, I've got my game over on one screen. It is from a Switch game that I've got capture carded into that monitor so that I can be captured by OBS. On another monitor, I've got the lecture slides, and then on my central monitor, I've got chat. I've got an alert window open. I've got my OBS, which is the software I use to stream, and music and whatever else we need. And then because I also like to not be completely digital, handwritten notes. So this is what we're going to be basically doing today. Feel free to explore Twitch, explore what the affordances are of this platform as we go through the lecture today. And, ask questions, leave comments, leave emotes, talk in chat. That is one of the affordances of this platform, that we can have a live chat conversation simultaneously. It's not breaking through the lecture as much as it might otherwise. So quick check. Yes, beautiful. All right, so that'll be all set, ready to go. And for those who weren't in earlier, I'm not updating my rules because, they're pretty much the same thing. You'll notice half the rules have to do with requesting songs, and that's just because I sing a lot in my channel. Okay. So for today, we'll do a super quick warm-up. We'll talk about the history of video games, get into Gamergate a bit. It's not my favorite topic, but it is an important historical moment, so it's something that you need to be aware of. Then we're going to conclude with a conversation about the readings for today, the required reading primarily, but you'll hear sprinkles of the other readings throughout. Okay, so warm up. What are the differences between these types of remix? Mashup, recut, additive. Getting a feeling of deja vu? Yeah, we've already done this before, right? So I want to bring it up again because, as you see, I'm playing Pokemon Brilliant Diamond today, which is a remake of Pokemon Diamond, which originally came out in 2006. So a question that I have for you is, a remake a remix? Think about that as we go through today. All right, so let's get into the history of video games. So we can connect the history of video games to arcades and gaming salons, going back to at least the 1800s. But for today, we're going to start our history in 1947. This is arguably the first video game. A lot of people don't think it is, but it's the cathode ray amusement device. And some don't think it is the first video game because it's not attached to a computing device. So instead, what you would do is you would get a transparency, so a blank screen, right? That would have a few graphic targets on it, and you would overlay it over the viewing window with that little line that you see going across it. And you would move all of these knobs and dials to try and get that ray, that line, to intersect with the targets on the transparency. That was the goal, right? So it might not be a video game by some or even most definitions, But you can see how this helped lead to video games, right? It's an important early moment in video game history, whether this is a video game or not. And that ends up bringing us to 1962. First parts of video game kind of jump around a bit, if you noticed. And talking about Space War in 1962. So remember, in these early moments of video games, where were the computers? Where were computers in the 1950s, 1960s through the early 1970s? And since I'm not on my research account, I will do standard name for me, which is Get Green-Eyed Trombonist. So computers were with the government and in universities, right? They were at government institutions. So it shouldn't be a surprise that the cathode ray amusement device was created by a professor, and that Space War was created by engineering students at Stanford. And Space War was created and by these engineers, many would call it the first video game, right? This was not publicly available, but pretty much engineering students would have access to these machines. And as many engineers do, they want to push things, see how they work, see what they can get them to do. And they also spent a lot of hours, often late at night, with these machines doing all this work. So sometimes they'd get bored and they figured out how to make Space War. The game ultimately has 2 spaceships, which you can kind of see on the screen. It's a little hard, but the spaceships would be on the screen and they would be in a dogfight. It's a 2-player game competing against each other. This was space, so they also had like this black hole feature in the center of the screen, and if you got too close to the black hole, you'd get sucked in and you would die that way. You could die if like a missile hit you, and you could die if I think you over exerted your engines, basically. There were some tricky things you could do to try and like give yourself extra power boosts, but ultimately it was a competitive game between 2 people. So this was originally played on the PDP-1 computer and is the first known video game to be installed on multiple machines, and also the first 2-player video game, as well as the first to have a gamepad designed for it to make the controls easier to use. Originally, you would use just what it was included with the PDP-1, but that was a little difficult, so someone created a gamepad for it to make controls easier. Jumping forward to 1972, we get Magnavox developing the patented brown box. On the other side, one set of engineers made Computer Space in 1971, which was a coin-operated box, but Magnavox released the first home video game console in 1972, the Magnavox Odyssey, patented brown box. Yeah, he can be a Damien, sure. The Computer Space engineers, on the other hand, those that created the coin-operated box in 1971, they went ahead and formed Atari in Silicon Valley and released Pong in 1972. So you can see the cabinet here, this brown cabinet, that's what we call these in arcades. It's a cabinet, it's got a screen in it. Pretty much nowadays you can put a screen and the computer stuff in it to run various games, but at this time they were single game machines. And yeah, so Pong started out in 1972 in arcades. By 1975, they released the home version. And for a lot of people, this is the first video game. It's definitely the first one that people think of when they're talking about early video game history, because this was the first commercially successful video game. And you can see it was a 2-player game going back to Space War, and was basically table tennis. Some copy versions of this would just call themselves table tennis. And then in 1979, we get Space Invaders. So by Taito in Japan, this game normalized basic elements of video games, right? Including having multiple lives, earning high scores, tracking, etc. It was a huge hit in the US. You may have even played it, even though it's a super old game. Like, I was definitely not around in 1979, but I've still played Space Invaders, right? Taito sold 60,000 cabinets of this game. So these were placed in arcades, pizza restaurants, various stores around the US, and could be played for like a quarter, basically. Atari had a competing game at this time that came out in 1979 called Asteroids. So you'll also notice that we've got a lot of space themes in the early video games, right? Like Space War. If you go back to the Amusement device, that was trying to replicate artillery shells. So a lot of war and space there. And then in 1980 and 1981, there were actually a string of hits for games. These included things like Defender, Missile Command, Galaga, Pac-Man, and Donkey Kong, actually. And if you want me to elaborate on anything, put it in chat. Feel free. Okay, here's stairs. This is also my first time playing Brilliant Diamond, but I have played the OG Diamond and Pearl. All right. So, Atari was really smart in some of their choices at this time. Specifically, instead of trying to sell separate consoles for each game, they sold one central console and had the ROM for each game in interchangeable cartridges. Something that we still basically use if you happen to be like me and like getting physical copies of games instead of downloads. So this is my physical copy of Pokemon Brilliant Diamond, which actually has Just Dance 2020 in it because that was the last game I was playing before that. So in 1980, Atari licenses Space Invaders and releases it for the console system. And by 1981, Atari's sales had increased 8-fold. So 8 times what they had previously been. I think she said, go find Damien. Yeah. I'm instantly going to try and go in the tall grass. All right, so that's consoles that we've brought ourselves to, and seeing which consoles ended up being popular. The interchangeable aspect definitely dominated, still dominates today. Hi, who are you? Yep. Pushing me back. But we can't forget that PCs started entering the homes with the Apple II and PET personal computers in the 70s and 80s, and PC gaming is a huge site for video gaming too. In 1975, one of the early games that was available for PCs, whose house is this? Was Colossal Cave Adventure. And this is one of the games that I've linked in our module for the class. So this is free and you can just play it. As you will, it is a text-based adventure game. And it was basically Dungeons and Dragons choose your own adventure style play, right? And this came out the same year as Dungeon. So Colossal Cave Adventure is text-based, fully text, that's all. Dungeon used ASCII. Oh, look, I found Damien. To create like borders and walls and different maps as well. So it was a little different. So there's almost this split that happens with video games, either being console-based or computer-based. And we still tend to make these distinctions today, right? Like, what kinds of game do you play? Oh, I play PC games. Oh, I play Xbox versus, PlayStation if you want to go with consoles. And then, Nintendo handhelds kind of off on their own for things, though the Switch is bridging some of those divides in interesting ways. But we didn't separate games just by what we played them on, right? Games developed distinct genres at this time. So we've got RTS as the first of the three, which is real-time strategy games. So the upper image that you see in the lecture screens is an RTS. I think it's Warcraft. And we can think of RTSs like chess, in that these are really strategy and resource management games. Then there's first-person shooters or FPS games. That's the bottom image, and I think that's a still from Duke Nukem. But you can also get games like Doom, Halo, Call of Duty, and as a twist on the genre, Portal. You can't freaking charge me 1 million Poké dollars. Okay, forget things. So FPSs I don't actually play. We can talk about disability in gaming as a later thing if we have time for it, but I happen to have severe simulator sickness, and that's something where if games are too high graphically, or they don't have a fixed screen view, or they have a first person view, things like that, they make me sick, and typically in 30 minutes I'll pass out. So let's just, are you going to stop me again, dude? Yes, you are. So I don't play FPSs, but they are an extremely popular genre. And so then the final category, which is something I definitely play, are RPGs or role-playing games. So that's the far right image, and they tend to be more based on tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, in that you play a role, right? So World of Warcraft is probably the most famous within this category, but even Pokemon is a Japanese-style role-playing game, or JRPG. Oh, look, I found water. Let's see. Let's just go to all the places. Do I need to follow him into his house? Probably. So let's go in his house. But we also can't forget online-specific gaming, right? So now we've got a third track where we've got these console systems, we've got the computer systems, and then we have online-specific games. As far back as 1978, we had things like Mud 1, which we've talked about, which was put on ARPANET in 1980. The screen grab that you see on the lecture slides is from Islands of Kismai in 1984, which was the first commercial online game. Initially, these were PC-driven games because you needed a PC to then have a network connection, but video game companies started adding network connections to consoles in the early 90s because they saw it as a lucrative move. And that dramatically increased access and the popularity of Xbox, specifically in 2001. Xbox and its popularity then is largely credited with the explosion of gaming in the new millennium, actually. So you get things like Warcraft, then Starcraft, then World of Warcraft, an MMORPG, Quake, which had an offshoot called Half-Life, which online FPS, Minecraft, which is an RTS, and things like Fortnite that it's a battle royale, but it pretty much is a blend of these classic categories. And as the game console became the primary in-home entertainment system for a lot of households, it created new opportunities for advertising, surveillance, and other human failings like sexism, racism, and ableism to proliferate. And that brings us to the thing I do not like talking about, but we do need to talk about Gamergate. We'll cover this fairly quickly, so if you want to know more and haven't read that Masanari suggested reading, I highly suggest that piece as a next step. So beginning in August 2014, a harassment campaign targeted several women in the video game industry, notably game developers Zoe Quinn and Brianna Wu, as well as feminist media critic Anita Sarkeesian. Gamergate proponents, Gamergaters, have stated that they were a movement, but had no official leaders or manifesto. Gamergate supporters organized anonymously or pseudonymously on online platforms such as 4chan, Internet Relay Chat, Twitter, and Reddit. Statements claiming to represent Gamergate have been inconsistent, making it difficult for commentators to identify goals and motives. Gamergate has often been defined by the harassment its supporters engaged in as a result of this. Gamergaters have frequently responded to this by denying that the harassment took place or by falsely claiming that it was manufactured by the victims. The controversy has been described as a manifestation of a culture war over cultural diversification, artistic recognition, and social criticism in video games, and over the social identity of gamers. That's an important one. Many supporters of Gamergate oppose what they view as the increasing influence of feminism on video game culture, and as a result, Gamergate is often viewed as a right-wing backlash against progressivism. So let's talk about Depression Quest, which is basically the igniting force for a lot of Gamergaters against Zoe Quinn. In 2013, Zoe Quinn, an independent game developer, released Depression Quest, a text-focused game designed to convey the experience of depression through a series of fictional scenarios. For those of you in a game design course, this was made on Twine. And it's based in part on Quinn's own experience with depression. The game received positive reviews in the gaming media, but faced backlash online from gamers who disliked its departure from typical game formats emphasizing violence and skill, and who opposed political intrusions into gamer culture. Political, very much in quotes. Let's see. Quinn was subjected to several months of harassment after its release, including rape and death threats. Quinn documented the harassment and spoke openly to the media about it, which led to an even greater intensity of abuse against them, including the posting of their home address online. They ultimately fled their house out of fear for their safety. And as an aside, Quinn brought a cyber harassment case against her ex-boyfriend and Gamergate. It was his libelous comments that led to all that harassment. And she did end up winning this case, but not before the judge told her that if she couldn't handle it, she should just turn off her computer. Yeah, I have many thoughts about that. So, less than 4 months after Gamergate began, Quinn's record of threats that they had received had grown 1,000-fold. That's 1,000 times in 4 months what it had been. The attacks against her included doxing, which is researching and broadcasting personally identifiable information about an individual, like a home address. Hacking of their Tumblr, Dropbox, and Skype accounts, rape and death threats, and even her parents were called and told the depraved violence that at least one harasser wanted to commit against their daughter. It's not good at all. Gamergate has been described as an expression of sexism and misogyny within gaming culture. Its main themes are criticism of feminism and so-called social justice warriors who are perceived as a threat to traditional video game culture. Women's greater visibility in the gaming industry has seen a corresponding rise in gendered harassment and intimidation directed at them. And this is important. It is not that women are suddenly playing games. It is that women are now visibly playing games. Women have always played games. It's just because of problems with things like harassment and whatnot. Women would not often play games publicly in stores. Many wouldn't go to a lot of arcades except for certain specific moments. They would play games at home, right, in a private area. So, you know, is what it is, but it's important to know that it's not that marginalized identities, women, people of different races, people with disabilities, etc., weren't playing games before. It's that they weren't as visible in the gaming area. So this sets the scene for the required reading for today, right? Intersecting Oppressions and Online Communities by Kashana Gray. Dr. Kashana L. Gray is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication and Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Illinois, Chicago. She is also a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, and she also previously served as an MLK scholar and visiting professor in Women and Gender Studies and Comparative Media Studies at MIT. She's also got a pretty baller Twitter, if I do say so myself. And what she's doing in this piece is an ethnography of women of color involved in the Xbox Live gaming platform. Ethnographic observations and narrative interviewing reveal that women of color, as outsiders failing to conform to the white male norm, face intersecting oppressions in mainstream gaming. They are linguistically profiled, how they speak, within the space based on how they sound, right? Specifically, Latina women within the space, Latinx women, experience nativism, racism, sexism, and in this case also heterosexism, as the Puerto Rican killers, one of the group that she interviewed was specifically LGBT Puerto Rican and Latinx women. African American women experienced racialized sexism stemming from the duality of their ascribed identities, right? The women within the study ultimately responded to this harassment by segregating from the larger gaming community and have created their own clans. In Xbox Live, they're called clans. It's similar to guild systems. And they'll game with other women or work hard to always be better than the male gamers that they face. With the diffusion of advanced technologies in video gaming, there has been a displacement of real-world inequalities into virtuality. As a quick aside, with Xbox Live, you get voice-based leads of linguistic profiling. This means gender, sex, and ethnic markers can be heard or imagined to be heard, and this leads to instances of harassment for a plethora of intersectional marginalized identities. But importantly, Gray isn't just documenting the harassment, but the community responses that are created to resist that harassment. These Black and brown women perform identity in certain ways to validate their inclusion in the game space, whether that means constantly beating the boys or only playing with people you know and trust. And both game designers and game players need to recognize the reality for racism and sexism in everyday gameplay. So if you're interested in how game designers have tried to work to attempt to curb hate speech, including Riot Games with League of Legends, which used to have a system that actually worked really well to decrease some of their stuff, you can check out the suggested reading by Amanda Coate. It's a really good piece. Love it. But that deals more with how companies have been working to curb harassment. Gray's piece is focused on how players are doing work to try and curb the harassment they personally experience. So at the end of the day, we need to understand that hate speech is not inherent to gaming. Don't do it. Call it out and shame it when you hear it. Help maintain safety in virtual spaces, both in game design and in player practices. Be part of the solution that keeps women from having to flee their houses because an ex wanted revenge. So I'm saying this from the place of someone with intersectional marginalized identities. No, racially, I am very privileged because I am a white woman, but I am a woman in gaming spaces, right? And though I love streaming on Twitch, I love streaming games, every time that I gear up to press the start streaming button, I have to be prepared that I might be facing harassment, which I have many times in the past. And it's for nothing more than the fact that I am a woman gaming on Twitch, right? So if you haven't read the Gray piece yet, absolutely do so. And if you've read it and loved it, which if you've read it, you've probably loved it, she's actually written an entire book on this subject and has many more articles out there related to it. So absolutely follow up with that stuff, follow her on Twitter, and support her work because it's important and impactful. All right, off my soapbox. Let's keep going. Small diversion over to another area of video gaming that some people don't consider really a big gaming thing. But the rise in gaming popularity has led to this rise in casual gaming, right? And that's largely exemplified through mobile games. So gaming is not just for fanatics. People are playing games all the time. They do polls every year pretty much to get an idea of how many US citizens are playing games. And right now it's standing at about 2/3 of all United States adult citizens are playing games. That's huge, right? Gaming is not a niche thing anymore. It is a thing most people do. And so as we recognize that more people are playing games, it undermines those stereotypes about who gamers are. And we recognize that people who game are diverse, with diverse interests, and that we should see more diverse types of game designers and games. Of course, we must acknowledge that computer games are largely designed to gather, these casual, simpler games, are largely designed to gather data and target marketing at players, right? These are what we call free to play, but pay to win is also the other side of that, right? But as gaming is a larger and larger industry, it is also a more influential one, not just in the economy, but also for our culture and our cultures. Because gaming culture can be very different in different pockets. And I did not assign this piece as a suggested reading, but it is important. Adrian Shaw talks about how we talk about games. Should we call it gaming culture? No. right? There are a multitude of gaming cultures, and if we think of gaming as a culture, we are removing it from the rest of society. But that doesn't work, right? We need to think about gaming in culture because it is influenced by and influences the culture and society around it, both where it's made and where it's played. Okay, so let's see who we've got here. We've got a good number of people here. I'm going to ask you to type in chat about this. We've got a bit of a discussion. No, I do not want Turtwig. So there's many things that we could use for our discussion because of recent news in gaming, right? With Activision Blizzard, the ongoing controversy there. One of the biggest people who spoke out against that behavior actually just today wrote her resignation letter and posted that. Oh yeah, no, I want a penguin. Sorry, everyone. I'm getting a penguin. So we could talk about that. But this is something that came out, and because this is a communication course and because I'm within the field of rhetoric, this really stood out to me. And I think it's really relates to our conversations around Gamergate and culture and society related to gaming, right? So this was a tweet made by a Twitch streamer in about a week ago, right? And the streamer complained on Twitter that he was suspended for a week from Twitch for using a gamer word, which he then clarified was not the N-word, but what he would later describe as the bundle of sticks word. So since this is a communication class, I want to draw our attention to how this streamer is strategically positioning himself as victim in these tweets. So first, he calls the use of the word an accident. Let's be clear, it was only an accident that he said it while streaming. You don't say those words accidentally unless you already use them purposefully. He then calls it a gamer word to both attempt to separate the word from being hate speech, which is the same reason he calls it the bundle of sticks word later, and in order to minimize the harm inherent in the word. But this strategy is also insinuating something absolutely awful about gaming, right? If the N-word and homophobic slurs are acceptable when gaming, if they're just gamer words, what does that say about gaming and the people who game? Something I personally do not agree with at all. And then finally, he ends stating how much he raised for charity, specifically positioning it as a charity for veterans, right? And positioning himself as a good guy, and implicitly arguing that his positive fundraising should erase his mistake. He wants a suspension reversal, but even if he didn't get one, he was only suspended for 7 days, which means by now, he is back. It ended yesterday. Which I believe is less than the standard protocol for Twitch TOS violations, which this was. Someone in the replies to this, by the way, the streamer since deleted it, but I was reading through it when it originally happened, and someone in the replies said that one of the games he played incidentally had a slur just as part of the title. It wasn't meant to be a slur, it's just in the way it was written, it included one. And they were auto-suspended for 30 days because of that. So that says something about the people running the platform too, right? It's important that we pay attention to this. Gaming is influenced by and influences culture. And this might say something about people who game, but it is also an argument for the continued acceptance of racism and homophobia in society writ large. So we need to pay attention to these incidents and not say it's just a game, but think beyond to the real world consequences that this behavior in gaming ends up producing. So as you look at these tweets, what are some of the things that you notice about this? If anyone's familiar, you might also be aware with the history that the gamer word argument has also been used to defend PewDiePie using the N-word. So this is very much about marginalized identities, slurs against marginalized people, and a fight over what is acceptable in gaming. But also, not just gaming, but society. Because if you're doing it in games, you're doing it in regular life. At least with your communicative actions. Okay. So, this horrible, deplorable incident, very much hate that it happened, probably will write a paper about it because it's rhetorically fascinating and it really draws on that tension, not the intent of the tweeter here, the streamer, but it is something that we can situate in the greater struggle. So things to consider. All right, so key takeaways. Make sure you're familiar with the history of video games. Understand how this history has been written in ways to obscure people with marginalized identities. So, as an example, we talked about Pac-Man before, but Miss Pac-Man came out soon after, and it was one of the most popular arcade games of all time. And it had an over 50% fan base of women and girls, right? So it's not that women are new to gaming. It's not that Black people are new to gaming. It's not that disabled people are new to gaming or anyone with intersectional identities related to any marginalized identity. It's that they have been hidden in these spaces and have become more visible over time. So as we become more visible, we face increased harassment and hate in reaction to that visibility. But don't write it off. We're responsible for the behavior we exemplify in games, and that behavior absolutely has real-world consequences. So think about that as we're gearing up to end lecture for today. What do you want your world to look like? All right. So think about that question and make sure that you come into class in person on Thursday. We will be back in our room for Photoshopping for Democracy. Do the Peck and Gull readings. Both are about 15 pages of actual reading content. And then don't forget that your design lab visit and Final Cut of Video 1 are due this week. They're due on Sunday, December 5th. So those are the big important things. But we're going to keep playing until the end of class. Ask questions, explore the platform, use some emotes. Let's talk about things. I probably know way too much about game studies. It's the main thing that I do. So if you want to actually talk about like the origin of game studies going back to 1938 and Johann Huizinga, and some of the racism inherent there, or Roger Calois and his different categories of gaming, I'm all for that. It is like an extra thing, so it got taken out of lecture for today, but I'm very happy to talk about that. You can't have my Pokemon, it's mine. Whee. And your names are all anonymous. So, like, if you have a question, but you're awkward about, like, thinking anxiety stuff pops up for you, this is a great place to ask questions. Ask questions about your assignments. Ask questions about gaming. Always happy to talk about gaming. You want to talk about the history of Pokemon? We can also do that. I once dominated a Pokemon trivia contest that was being streamed, actually, while dressed as a Pikachu, because why not? Oh, goodness. Favorite game of all time. Like, I am very much a diehard Pokemon gamer. It's not the only thing that I play, but as I grew up, I wasn't allowed an actual console. And I was only allowed like educational PC games unless they came with the computer. Played a lot of pinball. Pokemon Red and Blue versions were the first real games that I ever got back in 1998, because it blew up as a fad at that time, right? My sister got Pokemon Yellow. We each got a Game Boy Color, and she grew out of the fad. I did not. Die hard. So I have at least one game from every single generation of the mainline Pokemon games. I will be getting the Arceus Legends game when that comes out. And yeah, like, I will always turn to Pokemon as something I'm very loyal to. Love it. But I do play other games. I finished Gris this summer. That was a beautiful game exploring the 5 stages of grief. And I like a lot of like 2D games, puzzle platformers in general, JRPG style. But because of the sim sickness, nothing that's like too high graphic. Lots of questions. On original DB versus remake. So this Frosty Bite is the first time that I'm playing Brilliant Diamond. I played Pearl was actually my first game after Game Boy Color game. So I went through Crystal with Game Boy Color, and then my parents did not buy me a new system, so I could not play any other games until the DS Lite came out, and my friend was upgrading to that, and I convinced him and his mom that poor me, without any gaming system but a Game Boy Color, should have his old DS. And so he gave me his old DS, Pokemon Ranger, and Pokemon Pearl for my birthday that year. So it's got a like strong place in my heart for sure. One of the things I've seen with reviews for this, which I think is interesting, is people either love it or hate it because they feel it's more a direct remake rather than an expansion on. Some people wanted new things to happen. Some people are really happy there's no mega evolution going on with the game. So that gets into these questions of the remake versus remix, right? I think there are times when a remake can be a remix, but sometimes maybe not. Favorite Pokemon? I struggle with that. I have, like, Mew is great. Starters, like, OG starters, I'll go with Squirtle. If I was to get one Pokemon tattooed on me, though, it would be Taypig. And, you know, Pig as one of my last names. It's a fire pig. It's super cute. So I would go with Taypig, probably. But I do have an Umbreon Kyogurumi, and wore that for the 25th anniversary of Pokemon last spring. General thoughts on indie games / rhetoric. What does the specific category we make mean? Ooh, can you expand on that, actually? A.K. Selter Gerson. Not pay attention to anything she said. But that's part of the reason I chose Pokemon as the gaming system, because like you can pretty much stumble through the direct path pretty easily. They keep you from going off the path. And we can just come hang out here for a second. Let's see if we find anyone else to fight. So it works well when you've got other things to do during a stream. Yeah, so I think that's interesting, how we talk about indie as this experimental category, and we talk about it like where the inventive stuff can happen. I think that's what you're trying to get at there. And I think that that's kind of a rhetorical move to, you know, get the big game companies some slack. They should be the place of inventiveness. They've got the money, right? It should not rely on people that don't have a lot of money to be the ones that are pushing the industry forward. But that is often the case, right? Because big companies get entrenched in their schemes of making money, and they become less likely to try and take risks. While those that don't have any money don't have that same risk aversion going on. And that's why I think it's not that indies are necessarily more experimental, or that they are the only place where you can be experimental. I think that because of that argument, though, that is where we've been more experimental and where we get this new stuff, where we get that fun new stuff. Which then, once it becomes popular and it shows it's a success, the big companies go in and will replicate that. Yeah, no problem. So it is 12:56, which means that class is officially over. Let's go to a full screen webcam. And one of the things that I always do on my Twitch streams is sing right before the end of the stream. So we're going to do that again, so you get that same experience as you explore Twitch. So remember, come to class on Thursday, and so long. Farewell to you, my friends. Goodbye for now, until we meet again. It's been great to sing and play together, but now it's time to say goodbye. So long, farewell to you, my friends. Goodbye for now, until we meet again. Goodbye for now, until we meet again. Thanks, everyone. See you on Thursday.